They thought you needed them, and maybe for a season you did. Maybe there was a time when their voice felt like oxygen and their presence felt like stability and their approval felt like sunlight breaking through a dark sky. Maybe there was a time when you looked at your life and quietly believed that without them standing next to you the structure would collapse, the confidence would fade, the direction would disappear. And so you tolerated what you should not have tolerated, you silenced what you should have spoken. You shrank where you were meant to expand, because somewhere deep inside you believed the lie that your strength was borrowed and not built, that your power was given and not grown, that your worth was dependent and not divine. And they believed it too. They believed you needed them to survive, to succeed, to shine. They believed they were the center and you were the satellite. They believed if they pulled away you would panic. If they withheld affection you would beg. If they withdrew support you would crumble. They believed your silence meant weakness and your patience meant dependence. But what they never understood is that you were never dependent, you were discerning, you were never weak, you were wise, you were never clinging, you were choosing peace over chaos while you gathered your strength quietly behind the scenes, because real power does not scream. It builds. Real confidence does not chase, it calibrates. Real growth does not announce itself, it transforms in silence. And while they were busy assuming you could not function without them, you were learning how to function without approval, without validation, without reassurance. You were learning how to sit alone without feeling abandoned, how to move forward without constant applause, how to make decisions without asking for permission. And that is when everything began to shift. Because the moment you stopped proving your worth to someone who already decided to undervalue you is the moment you stepped into a version of yourself they could no longer control. They thought you needed them, but what you really needed was the lesson, the awakening, the realization that your foundation was never external, it was internal. It was built through every disappointment you survived, every tear you wiped away alone, every night you stayed up questioning your value, and every morning you still chose to show up anyway. And the irony is that the more they distanced themselves trying to test your dependency, the more you discovered your independence. The more they withheld trying to create insecurity, the more you created stability within yourself. The more they assumed you would chase, the more you focused on becoming, and suddenly the dynamic flipped, because when you no longer need someone to feel complete you become impossible to manipulate. When you no longer fear losing someone you become unshakable. When your happiness is self-generated you become unstoppable, and they did not see it coming because they confused your love with reliance and your loyalty with limitation. They mistook your kindness for incapability and your forgiveness for fragility, but what they were really witnessing was maturity, emotional intelligence, restraint, and growth. They were watching someone who understood that not every battle is meant to be fought loudly and not every departure is meant to be resisted. Sometimes the strongest move is to let someone believe their own narrative while you quietly rewrite yours, and that is exactly what you did. You rewrote the script. You stopped auditioning for a role in their life and started directing your own. You stopped shrinking to maintain connection and started expanding to maintain self-respect. You stopped asking whether you were enough and started recognizing that you were more than enough for the right environment. And the truth is they were comfortable believing you needed them because it fed their ego. It gave them a sense of importance. It positioned them as the savior in a story where you were never broken, and when you removed that role from them it forced them to confront something uncomfortable, the realization that their power was never absolute, that your presence was not a privilege they granted but a gift you offered, and gifts can be withdrawn, energy can be redirected, attention can be reassigned. And when you chose to redirect your focus toward your growth, your purpose, your peace, it created a void in their world. They did not expect, because they thought you were orbiting them but you were simply passing through. They thought you would collapse without their structure but you were building your own foundation brick by brick in silence. They thought you were emotionally attached to their presence but you were spiritually aligned with your evolution, and evolution requires detachment. It requires letting go of versions of yourself that believed you needed permission to shine. It requires walking away from environments that only celebrate you when you're small enough to control, and you reached a point where staying dependent felt heavier than standing alone, where proving loyalty felt more exhausting than protecting peace, where chasing connection felt emptier than cultivating purpose, and that shift changed everything because once a person realizes they can survive what they feared losing, they become fearless. Once a person sees that the world does not end when someone walks away, they become grounded. Once a person understands that their value does not decrease when someone fails to see it, they become powerful beyond measure. And now the same people who assumed you would struggle are watching you thrive. The same people who believed you needed them are questioning why you seem lighter, calmer, stronger. The same people who expected you to beg are witnessing you build, because independence is attractive, self-sufficiency is magnetic, emotional stability is rare, and when you embody those qualities you shift the entire dynamic without saying a word. You do not need to announce your strength, it radiates. You do not need to defend your growth, it shows. You do not need to remind anyone what they lost, your absence does that naturally, and this is not about revenge or ego or proving someone wrong, this is about alignment, about stepping into the truth that you were always capable, always resilient, always enough. This is about understanding that sometimes people enter your life not to complete you but to trigger the realization that you were already complete. Sometimes they underestimate you not because you lack value but because they cannot measure depth they have never explored within themselves, and when they thought you needed them they were really projecting their own fear of being unnecessary, because the hardest truth for anyone to face is that they are not as indispensable as they imagined. And you taught that lesson without confrontation, without drama, without chaos. Simply by standing up internally and deciding that your identity would no longer be tied to someone else's perception, you decided that love would be chosen not clung to, that respect would be mutual not begged for, that support would be appreciated not depended on, and in doing so you elevated beyond the version of yourself that once doubted. You moved beyond the stage of seeking validation and entered the stage of self-trust. And self-trust changes posture, tone, energy, boundaries. It changes what you tolerate and what you attract. It changes how you respond and what you expect. It changes how you see yourself in the mirror and how you show up in the world. And once that internal shift happens there is no going back to the old dynamic, because you cannot unknow your strength once you have experienced it. You cannot unsee your resilience once you have relied on it. You cannot unlearn the truth that you were never as dependent as they believed, and now the narrative is different. Now you are not the one clinging to what was, you are the one confidently walking toward what will be. You are not the one fearing abandonment, you are the one understanding that what leaves makes space for what aligns. You are not the one questioning your worth. You are the one embodying it without explanation, and that is the quiet revolution they never anticipated. The transformation that happens when someone stops outsourcing their power and starts owning it fully. When someone realizes that needing no one does not mean rejecting everyone but choosing connections from strength rather than scarcity, and from that place you become untouchable in the best way, not cold, not distant, but centered, grounded, sovereign, and when they look at you now they see something they did not see before. They see someone who does not chase approval, who does not crumble under distance, who does not lose identity in attachment. They see someone who could walk away if necessary and still thrive, and that realization is louder than any argument could ever be, because the greatest proof that you never needed them is not in what you say, it is in how you live, how you build, how you glow, how you continue forward with grace and certainty. And the final truth is this: you did not lose anything essential when they underestimated you. You gained clarity, strength, independence, perspective, and peace, and sometimes the greatest upgrade in your life begins the moment someone assumes you cannot function without them, and you quietly show the universe and yourself that you absolutely can. And as time continued to unfold, something even deeper began to happen inside you, something they could not see and probably still do not understand, because when a person finally realizes they are capable of standing on their own, it does not just create independence, it creates awareness. It sharpens perception, it strengthens intuition, and you started noticing patterns you once ignored. You started recognizing how often you minimized your own needs just to maintain harmony, how often you overextended your energy just to avoid conflict, how often you convinced yourself that crumbs were enough because you were afraid of losing the whole table. And that awareness did not make you bitter, it made you wiser, it made you calmer, it made you more selective about where your time, your love, your effort would flow, and the very energy they once mistook for dependence transformed into discernment, because now you understood the difference between wanting someone and needing them, between loving someone and losing yourself in them, between supporting someone and carrying them at the expense of your own growth. And this clarity shifted your entire presence. You no longer reacted from fear of abandonment, you responded from a place of self-respect. You no longer negotiated your boundaries to keep someone comfortable, you reinforced them to keep yourself aligned, and the more aligned you became, the less chaotic your world felt, because chaos often enters when we try to force connections that are no longer balanced, when we try to hold on to roles we have outgrown, when we try to convince people to see value they are unwilling to recognize. And you stopped forcing, you stopped convincing, you stopped explaining your worth to anyone determined to misunderstand it, and in that stillness you found power. Not loud power, not performative power, but grounded power, the kind that does not require validation because it is rooted in self-awareness. And ironically, the distance they created trying to prove you needed them became the exact space you required to rediscover yourself fully, because sometimes when someone steps back, they accidentally give you room to step forward, and when they withdrew what they thought was essential support, you were forced to activate dormant strength, skills you underestimated, resilience you had not tested, confidence you had postponed. And once activated, those qualities did not disappear when circumstances improved, they became part of your identity, and that is what truly changed the dynamic forever, because it is one thing to survive alone temporarily, it is another to realize you can thrive alone indefinitely, and thriving shifts your posture in life, it shifts how you negotiate, how you love, how you walk into rooms, how you leave conversations, it shifts how you respond when someone tries to re-enter your life. Assuming you are still the same version they left behind, but you are not, you are no longer operating from the belief that someone else is your source of stability, you have become your own anchor, and anchors do not chase ships that drift away, they hold steady until something worthy docks willingly. And that steadiness is what unsettles those who once believed you were fragile, because fragility seeks constant reassurance. But strength radiates quiet certainty, and now when they look at you, there is no desperation in your energy, no urgency in your tone, no fear in your decisions. There is only clarity, and clarity is intimidating to those who relied on your confusion, because confusion kept you reachable, insecurity kept you persuadable, doubt kept you adjustable, but confidence makes you selective, it makes you intentional, it makes you aware that your time is finite and your peace is valuable. And suddenly the leverage they thought they held dissolves, because leverage only exists when someone believes they have no alternative, and you discovered that your greatest alternative was yourself, your own creativity, your own capability, your own emotional stability, and that discovery changed how you show up in every area of life, not just relationships but career, friendships, goals. And now as you move further into this new chapter of your life, there is a calmness about you that cannot be faked, a steadiness that cannot be borrowed, because it was earned through every moment you chose growth over attachment and clarity over comfort. And what makes this phase different from all the others is that you are no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. You are not trying to show them they were wrong. You are not trying to make them regret underestimating you. You are not trying to demonstrate your independence as a performance, because true independence does not need an audience, it only needs alignment, and alignment has become your new standard. You wake up each day not asking who will validate you but asking whether your actions reflect your values. You walk into conversations not wondering how to keep someone but knowing you can leave if respect disappears. You love not from fear of being alone but from the fullness of already being whole, and that fullness is what changes everything, because when you operate from fullness you stop negotiating your boundaries, you stop accepting half-hearted effort, you stop confusing intensity with intimacy, and you start recognizing that anyone who once believed you needed them was only comfortable in a version of you that had not yet discovered your depth, and depth can be intimidating to those who prefer control. Because depth cannot be easily influenced, it cannot be easily persuaded, it cannot be easily shaken, and you have become deep in your thinking, deep in your discernment, deep in your self-respect. And that depth creates a presence that speaks before you even open your mouth. People sense that you are no longer attached to outcomes in the same way. They sense that your happiness is no longer hanging by the thread of someone else's attention. They sense that you are grounded in something internal and immovable. And that immovability is what makes you powerful, not in a loud or dominant way but in a centered and sovereign way. Because sovereignty means you own your emotions, you own your choices, you own your direction, and no one else dictates your value anymore. And the most beautiful part of this transformation is that it did not make you cold, it made you compassionate without being compromised, it made you loving without being lost, it made you generous without being drained, and that balance is rare. Because many people swing from dependence to detachment, from attachment to avoidance, but you found the middle ground where you can care deeply and still walk away confidently if necessary, and that balance is what ensures you will never return to a dynamic where someone assumes you cannot function without them, because now you know the truth in your bones, you have lived it, you have tested it, you have proven to yourself in the quietest hours that you are capable of rebuilding from nothing, of healing without closure, of moving forward without guarantees. And once a person experiences their own resilience firsthand, fear loses its grip, and without fear there is freedom, freedom to choose wisely, freedom to say no without guilt, freedom to say yes without desperation, freedom to build connections based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency, and this freedom radiates from you in subtle ways, in the way you pause before responding instead of reacting, in the way you prioritize peace over pride, in the way you let silence speak when someone expects you to chase, and silence from a place of strength is not weakness, it is confirmation that you no longer feel the need to argue your worth, because your life reflects it, your growth reflects it, your stability reflects it, and if they ever look back and wonder how you managed to rise without them, the answer is simple yet profound: you stopped outsourcing your power. You reclaimed every piece of yourself that you once handed over in exchange for temporary security. You gathered your confidence from moments of solitude, you gathered your wisdom from mistakes you refused to repeat, you gathered your peace from boundaries you finally enforced, and piece by piece you built a version of yourself that does not collapse when someone exits, and that is the ultimate lesson in all of this. Not that they were wrong about you needing them, but that you were wrong about needing anyone to confirm who you already were becoming. Because the truth is you were always in the process of evolving, always in the process of strengthening, always in the process of remembering your own capability, and their underestimation simply accelerated the awakening. It forced you to confront your fears, to challenge your limiting beliefs, to step into responsibilities you once avoided, and now you stand on the other side not bitter but better, not resentful but refined, not attached but aligned. And if they ever attempt to step back into your life with the same assumption that you still rely on their presence for stability, they will quickly realize that the foundation has shifted, that you are no longer building your world around a single person. You are building it around purpose, around self-respect, around vision, and purpose does not crumble when one person leaves, self-respect does not disappear when someone withdraws approval, vision does not fade when external support fluctuates. And that is why you can smile genuinely now, not because everything is perfect but because you trust yourself completely. And self-trust is the highest form of security. It allows you to love freely without fear, to invest wisely without anxiety, to walk away peacefully without drama, and that peace is the final proof that you never truly needed them, because needing creates panic at the thought of loss. But you no longer panic, you reflect, you assess, you decide, and then you move forward with grace. And in that forward movement there is no bitterness, only gratitude for the lesson. Because every assumption they made about your weakness pushed you closer to discovering your strength, every moment they doubted your independence forced you to cultivate it, every time they believed you would fall apart without them gave you the opportunity to stand taller on your own, and now the story is complete, not because they admitted they were wrong, but because you no longer require that admission to feel whole. You do not need applause to validate your growth, you do not need acknowledgement to confirm your evolution, you simply continue becoming, expanding, elevating, and that continuous elevation is the quiet triumph that speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Because at the end of the day the greatest power you can possess is the understanding that you are enough on your own, that connection is a choice not a necessity, that love is a complement not a requirement for identity. And once you internalize that truth deeply, permanently, unshakably, no one will ever again be able to convince you that you need them in order to survive, succeed, or shine, because you have already proven to yourself that you can do all three independently, confidently, and with a level of grace that only comes from someone who has walked through underestimation and emerged completely self-defined. And as this chapter closes, what truly matters is not that they misunderstood you, underestimated you, or assumed you could not survive without them. What truly matters is that you now understand yourself in a way you never did before. You understand that your strength was never borrowed, it was built, your stability was never external, it was internal, and your worth was never dependent on someone choosing to stay, it was rooted in who you are regardless of who comes or goes, and that realization is the real victory. Because when you no longer operate from fear of loss, you begin to operate from confidence in self. When you no longer cling to people for identity, you begin to build an identity that stands on its own, and from that place you do not reject connection but you refine it, you do not avoid love but you approach it whole, you do not chase validation but you attract respect. And the quiet truth that completes this story is simple and powerful. They thought you needed them, but you only needed the lesson, you only needed the awakening. You only needed the moment that forced you to look within and discover that everything you were searching for in someone else was already developing inside you, and now you move forward not with something to prove but with something to protect, your peace, your growth, your self-respect, and that is how the story ends, not with revenge, not with regret, but with evolution, clarity, and the unshakable confidence of someone who finally knows they were always enough on their own.